This CSS course is different from anything else on YouTube. Every complex topic, Flexbox, grid, transitions, is taught visually and diagrammatically, not through theory alone. And every concept gets implemented directly inside a real project, the DevCard, within 3 to 4 minutes of introducing it, because understanding CSS is one thing, seeing it work in front of you is another. Let's build it. Let's begin by understanding what CSS actually is. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. CSS controls the visual design and appearance of a web page. For example, this button without CSS looks quite poor. The font size is off, the color is missing, and the dimensions are wrong. It simply does not look good. But with CSS applied, you can see the transformation. Color has been added, the font size is refined, the letter spacing is improved, and the background color is set. All of this is achievable with CSS. You have now seen the comparison between the two buttons, how it looks without CSS, and how CSS transforms it completely. In simple terms, CSS makes everything on a web page look polished and professional. The first topic we will cover in CSS is the box model. The box model is a core concept that explains how every single HTML element is treated as a box on a web page. You may not fully grasp this right now, but by the end of this section, it will become completely clear. The box model has 4 parts: content, padding, border, and margin. Let's understand each one individually. Content refers to the actual text, images, or any other element sitting inside the box. Padding is the space that exists between the content and the border. The border is the line that wraps around the padding and the content. And the margin is the space outside the border. It separates one element from another on the page. For example, consider this box model diagram on screen. The text you see inside is the content. The light sky blue area surrounding it is the padding. The black outline is the border, and everything outside that border is the margin. Looking at this diagram, we can add padding on all 4 sides of the content. Similarly, we can apply a border on all 4 sides, and we can also set a margin on all 4 sides. We also have the flexibility to apply padding, border, or margin to just 1 side, 2 sides, or 3 sides. It is entirely our choice. Let's move into the code now, and it will become much easier to understand. I have VS Code open, and an index.html file has already been created. You should create one too, since I trust you have already learned HTML. HTML must come first. You cannot learn CSS without a solid foundation in HTML. If you have not yet studied HTML, please do so before continuing with this course. I have already written some starter code inside the section here, as you can see on screen. Write this exact code. There should be no differences. There is also an image included, and if you open the output in the browser, this is what it looks like. Think of the entire layout as a box. To write CSS, we will first create a separate file called style.css. All of our styling code will go inside this file. CSS can be written in 3 different ways. It can be written directly inside the HTML file, but that is not the preferred approach. Creating a dedicated CSS file and writing all styles there is the professional and recommended method. Before we apply the box model in this project, we need to understand one more concept: the CSS selector. In CSS, a selector is the mechanism we use to target a specific HTML element in order to apply styles to it. Think of a selector as something that points to an HTML element, and the CSS rule as the instruction that follows. Selectors correspond to HTML elements. For example, the H1 tag, the paragraph tag, the image tag, and the div tag can all be used as selectors. For instance, if we have an H1 tag containing the text hello, and we want to make that text red, we write H1 in the CSS and set the color property to red. Without a selector, CSS would have no way of knowing which element should receive that style rule. That is precisely the job of a selector, to identify a specific element so that the defined properties are applied only to it. There are several types of selectors available, including the element selector, the class selector, the ID selector, the universal selector, and the group selector. We will explore all of these in detail shortly, but for now, this foundation is what we need. Now that we understand the basic selector, let's see the box model in action through code. First, go to the index.html file, and inside the head tag, below the title, add a link element with the href attribute pointing to style.css. This link connects your CSS file to your HTML document. This step is critical. Without it, none of the styles you write in style.css will have any effect. The first element we will target is the body tag. If you look at the browser output right now, you will notice a small white gap around the content, including above the image and along the left side. This is a default margin of 8 pixels that browsers apply on all 4 sides automatically. To remove it, we select the body tag in our CSS file and set the margin property to 0. Once the margin is set to 0, you will see those white gaps disappear entirely. We also apply the box sizing property and set it to border box. By default, browsers use the content box model, but switching to border box means the width of an element will include its padding and border, making layout management significantly easier. Next, we go back to index.html and target the section element. Inside its style rule, we set the margin property to 80 pixels on top, auto on the right, 0 on the bottom, and auto on the left. Let's break this down. The 80 pixel top value pushes the content downward from the top of the page. A pixel is a unit of measurement that defines how far something is spaced. The auto value on the right and left sides means the browser calculates equal space on both sides automatically, effectively centering the element horizontally. The 0 at the bottom means no margin is applied there. Because of this, just as the diagram showed, all 4 sides are independently calculated, not just one. Next, we add a padding bottom of 20 pixels to the section. You will notice in the browser that nothing appears to have changed yet. To make the padding visible, we will temporarily add a border property and set it to 2 pixels, solid style, and red in color. Now, looking at the browser, you can see space appearing at the bottom. That is our padding. The padding sits inside the border. It does not go beyond it, because padding always works inward. The margin, on the other hand, works outward, which is why the 80 pixel gap at the top is visible outside the border. I will now remove the border property since it was only added as a visual demonstration. Moving on, let's go back to index.html and target the main element. Inside its style rule, we set padding to 10 pixels. In the browser, you will see space appear around the content inside main because padding works inward, creating space from the inside. When a single value is given for padding, it applies equally to all 4 sides. If 2 values are provided, the first applies to the top and bottom, and the second applies to the left and right. The same shorthand logic applies to margin. Now let's look at the button in index.html, which has the label Hire Me. We will add padding to it as well. Inside the button style rule, we set padding to 10 pixels on the top and bottom, and 18 pixels on the left and right. You will see the button grow in size. 10 pixels of space added vertically and 18 pixels added horizontally. This is because padding expands the element from the inside, not from the outside. Next, we target the article element and apply padding only on the left side. Inside the article style rule, we set padding left to 20 pixels. In the browser, you will notice that the skills section heading has shifted inward, because 20 pixels of internal space have been added on the left. Now, the Hire Me button appears quite close to the text above it. To create separation, we use margin. Because margin adds space on the outside, we add margin top of 30 pixels to the button. Looking at the browser, you can now see the button has moved down, creating clear visual separation from the content above. Finally, let's go back to index.html and target the div element, which contains our social media icons. Inside the div style rule, we set margin top to 33 pixels. In the browser, you will now see a generous gap appear between the Hire Me button and the social icons below it, all thanks to margin. At this point, I hope the distinction between padding and margin is fully clear. We still have a couple of essential CSS selectors to cover: the class selector and the ID selector. The class selector targets an element based on a specific class name assigned to it. Consider this example on screen. We have 3 div elements. If I want to make only the second div red, and I use the element selector by writing div with a color of red in the CSS, the red color would be applied to all 3 divs, not just the second. In situations like this, we use a class selector which allows us to target only one specific element and apply styles exclusively to it. Now let's also understand the ID selector, and then we will move into the code. The ID selector targets a unique element on the page using a specific ID attribute. Its symbol is the hash character, whereas the class selector uses a dot. To highlight the key differences, an ID is a unique identifier, meaning it can target only one single element on a given page. A class, on the other hand, is reusable and can be applied to multiple elements. In terms of uniqueness, an ID must be unique per page, while a class can be reused freely. An element can only have one ID, but it can carry multiple classes simultaneously. The syntax also differs. An ID is referenced with a hash symbol in CSS, while a class is referenced with a dot. In terms of priority, an ID carries higher specificity than a class. Let's put this into code, and it will become straightforward. I have index.html open in VS Code. To target the section element using a CSS class, I will add a class attribute inside the opening section tag and give it the name card. This means card is now the class associated with this section. Whenever we want to apply styles to this section, we can do so through this class. Now let's open style.css. We will remove the existing section selector and replace it with DevCard. The moment we remove section, the styles disappear. The moment we add DevCard, the styles come back. This demonstrates that we can target the same section element in 2 ways: through its element tag or through its assigned class. I hope the CSS selector concept is now fully clear. Our next topic is typography. Typography defines how text is styled, how it appears, and how it should look on a web page. The common typography properties we have are font family, which controls the style of the typeface, font size, which controls how large or small the text appears, and font weight, which controls how bold or light the text is. In other words, its thickness. Without typography, our text looks like this, as you can see on screen. The spacing is poor, the weight is flat, and the style is entirely default. But with typography applied, the difference is striking. The gradient color, the refined font size, and the proper font weight all come together. All of this is achievable through typography. Let's see how typography works in practice by opening VS Code. But before that, we will open a browser and search for Google Fonts. The first result at the top is the official Google Fonts website. Open it. Once inside, you will see a large collection of fonts. Choose whichever one appeals to you. I will search for a font called Inter, which is the one I prefer and will be using. After opening it, click the Get Font button and then click Get Embedded Code. You will see 2 options for linking the font: a link tag or an import statement. Click on the import option and copy the import URL shown inside it. Now open VS Code and at the very top of style.css, paste that import URL. Next, go back to the browser and copy the font family declaration for Inter with sans serif as the fallback. Paste that font family declaration inside the body rule in your CSS. You will immediately see the font change across the entire page. Notice the web developer heading in particular. There is a clear and visible difference between the previous typeface and the new one. You may also notice that the paragraph text appears slightly small, so we will increase its size. To do that, we target the paragraph tag and set the font size to 17 pixels. In the browser, you will see the paragraph text has grown. The size has increased as expected. Next, we target the list item tag and set its font size to 17 pixels as well. In the browser, the list items have also grown, now matching the paragraph text. The button's font size also looks quite small, so we will increase that too. Inside the button rule, we set the font size to 19 pixels. You can see the button text has grown and is now noticeably clearer and easier to read. Our next topic covers colors and variables in CSS. First, let's understand color. It controls how text looks, what shade it carries, whether applied to text, a background, or a border. We can define color in 4 ways. The first is by using a color name directly, such as red, green, or blue. The second is using hex colors, and for example, #f represents white, and #0 represents black. The third method is RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. Each channel is defined with a numeric value from 0 to 255. The fourth and final method is RGBA, the same as RGB, but with an added alpha channel that controls opacity. The alpha value ranges from 0 to 1, where 1 is fully opaque and 0 is fully transparent. For example, 0.5 gives 50% transparency. Before we write any code, there is one more concept we need to understand: CSS Variables, also called custom properties. CSS Variables allow us to store a value under a name and then reuse that name anywhere throughout the style sheet. To define a variable, we use the root selector, and inside it, we write double dash followed by the variable name, then assign it a value. Color values are commonly stored this way, but any CSS property value can be stored in a variable. The root selector makes the variable globally accessible, meaning it can be used anywhere in the file. To use a variable, we write the property name followed by the var function, and inside the function, we pass the variable name. Let's write the code now, and the concept will become much clearer in practice. Open style.css, and at the very top, write the root selector. Inside it, define a variable called textColor, and assign it the hex value for black. Then define a second variable called bg-color, and assign it a very light off-white hex value, not pure white, but close to it. Both of these are defined using hex values, though you could also write the color name directly and it would work. Now, to apply the background variable, go to the body rule and set the background color property using the var function with bg-color as the argument. After applying it, you will notice the website's background has shifted slightly. It is now a soft, dimmed off-white rather than pure white. That is the variable doing its work. Next, inside the card rule, set the background color to plain white using the hex value for white. Looking at the browser, now the card has a clean white background, while the overall page remains in that subtle off-white tone. The card stands out clearly against the page background, which is exactly the effect we are after. The next topic we will cover in CSS is Flexbox. Flexbox is one of the most important topics in all of CSS, so we will spend a bit more time here to make sure it is fully understood. Flexbox is a CSS layout system that makes it very easy to arrange, align, and distribute items within a container. Before Flexbox existed, developers relied on positioning, floats, and table-based layouts. Flexbox replaced all of that. It makes building fully responsive layouts far simpler and more predictable. There are many properties within Flexbox, but we will focus only on those that are most commonly used in real-world projects. These are flex direction, justify content, align items, gap, and flex wrap. There are others, such as flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis, but our primary focus will remain on the 5 listed above. Let's begin with flex direction. Flex direction controls the direction in which items are laid out inside a container. It has 2 primary axes: the row, which is horizontal and is considered the main axis, and the column, which is vertical and is considered the cross-axis. There are 2 key properties we use alongside flex direction: the display property and flex direction itself. Flex direction handles column layout, row reverse, and column reverse arrangements. The display property is what activates Flexbox. When we write display flex, the items inside the container immediately shift to a horizontal arrangement. By default, block level elements stack vertically, but display flex makes them align horizontally in a row. For example, imagine a container with 3 boxes numbered 1, 2, and 3. By default, they stack vertically, but with display flex, they line up in a row. If we then want them to stack vertically again, we use flex direction set to column. With that property applied, the items return to a vertical arrangement. We also have row reverse and column reverse. Row reverse takes the current horizontal order and flips it. So what was 1, 2, 3 from left to right becomes 3, 2, 1. Column reverse does the same thing vertically. What was 1, 2, 3 from top to bottom becomes 3, 2, 1. The second property is justify content. Justify content controls item placement along the main axis, horizontally when the flex direction is row. The most common values are center, which brings all items to the center of the container. Space between, which distributes equal space between items with no space at the outer edges. Space around, which adds space between items and also adds half that amount of space on the left and right edges. And space evenly, which distributes perfectly equal space between all items and at both outer edges. The third property is align items. Align items controls placement along the cross-axis, vertically when the flex direction is row. The key difference between align items and justify content is simply which axis each one controls. One handles the main axis, the other handles the cross-axis. Common values include flex start, which places items at the beginning of the cross-axis, center, which centers them vertically, and flex end, which places them at the end. The flex prefix is optional for end and start. The fourth property is gap. Gap does exactly what the name implies. It creates space between the items inside a flex container. You can give it any pixel value, and that amount of space will appear between each item. The fifth property is flex wrap. By default, Flexbox tries to fit all items into a single line, even if they overflow the container. When we set flex wrap to wrap, items that cannot fit on one line will automatically move down to the next line. This behavior is especially useful for responsive layouts. As the screen width decreases, items wrap downward naturally. There are additional Flexbox properties such as flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis, and the shorthand flex property, but we will not cover those here. The properties we have just explored account for approximately 90% of what you will need when building real websites. Now let's move to the code. Enough theory for now. Looking at our project, these social icons, Facebook, YouTube, and others, are quite tightly packed together. We can fix this cleanly with Flexbox. Looking at the HTML, these icons are wrapped inside a div, so that div is the flex container we will target. Open style.css and locate the div rule. The first property we will add is display flex. Display flex is essential here, and without it, none of the other Flexbox properties will take effect. The second property we add is align items set to center. This centers the icons vertically within the container. The third property is justify content set to center. With this applied, you can see the icons have moved to the horizontal center of their container. Now we add one more property, gap, and set it to 20 pixels. You can immediately see that the social icons now have generous, even spacing between them. That is the power of Flexbox. A few focused properties, and the layout is completely transformed. I have only applied Flexbox to what this project requires, but I strongly encourage you to practice it further on your own. Flexbox is used constantly in real-world development, and the more you experiment with it, the more natural it will feel. If this explanation has been clearer than other tutorials you have watched, genuinely helps the algorithm surface this course to others. And if you want to catch the JavaScript course I am releasing next, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. CSS Grid comes next after Flexbox. CSS Grid is a powerful layout system that we use to manage complex layouts, specifically across columns and rows. While Flexbox arranges items in only a single direction, either a row or a column, Grid was designed for true two-dimensional layouts, handling rows and columns together. In CSS Grid, we work with properties such as display grid, grid template columns, and gap. What Grid does is place elements inside a container grid, organizing them into a structured layout. Grid template columns defines the number of columns and their size. One of the values used here is FR, a unit that stands for a fraction of the available space. For example, if we have a container and apply 3 equal FR units to grid template columns, this creates 3 columns of equal width. And if we apply 1 FR followed by 2 FR, the second column will take up twice as much space as the first. Grid also has a gap property which adds spacing between rows and columns, and very similar to how gap works in Flexbox, with little difference between the two. We also have grid template rows and grid column, though we will not go too deep into these details. In general, I recommend favoring Flexbox over Grid for most layouts. That is my personal preference. Grid is best reserved for situations involving genuinely complex layouts. I will leave further exploration of Grid as practice for you on your own. I cannot walk through every single property, and I cannot implement every use case inside this project for you. So treat CSS Grid as your independent challenge. Let me know in the comments which one you preferred working with, Flexbox or CSS Grid. Our next topic is responsive design. Responsive design refers to how a website adapts and looks across different devices, screen sizes, and resolutions. Typically, we design a website at a standard size, but the moment it is viewed on a mobile phone, tablet, or laptop, its appearance changes. It no longer looks the same as it does on a desktop computer. Let me give you a practical example. When a website includes an image, that image might display at a large size on a desktop or PC. But on mobile, the screen is much smaller, so showing that same large image would break the layout entirely. This is exactly why we use responsive design. So the image displays at one size on a PC and an appropriately smaller size on mobile. In responsive design, we rely on media queries, which let us change CSS properties at specific screen widths. The syntax begins with the @ symbol, followed by media, and then max width or min width inside round brackets. Inside that, you define the pixel width at which the change should occur. For example, 600 pixels or 500 pixels. Then, whichever property you want to change, for instance, an image that is 400 pixels wide on a PC but should only be 80 pixels wide on mobile, you define that updated value inside the media query, and it will be applied automatically. Let's write some code now, and media queries along with responsive design will become much clearer. We have VS Code open, and the first thing we will do is open inspect, since inspect lets us explore everything related to responsive design. After opening inspect, click on the responsive design mode icon. This gives us previews for a variety of different screen sizes. Right now, looking at the image, our card appears correctly. But let's check how it looks on a mobile screen. When we switch to the responsive view and select a device, for example a Galaxy phone, you can see the image inside our card no longer flows correctly. It is overflowing horizontally along the x-axis, causing the page to scroll sideways. Responsive design, through media queries, is exactly what fixes this issue. Here is how we fix it. First, we target the section that wraps all of our card content. We have already given this section a class name of card, so we will work with that. OpenStyle.css, and at the top, write the @ symbol followed by media. After that, write max width inside round brackets, and we will assign it a value of 460 pixels. What max width 460 pixels means is, whenever the screen width reaches 460 pixels or smaller, the code inside this media query will be applied. Inside this block, we will write .card, targeting the card using its class selector. Inside the card rule, we will set its width to 95%. We use % here deliberately. Percentage values shrink proportionally as the browser width shrinks, whereas fixed pixel values stay the same and end up overflowing. Right now, you can see our card is still overflowing. As we shrink the browser window, the section's width shrinks accordingly, but the image inside the card is still overflowing horizontally. To fix this, we apply the same logic using the width property. Since width controls the horizontal, x-axis space an element occupies. We scroll back up and target the image element directly. Inside the image rule, we set the width to 100%. Now you can see the image resizing smoothly. It is no longer overflowing, and it shrinks proportionally as the container shrinks. This is responsive design in action. I hope this has made it clear how media queries work within responsive design. Our next topic is pseudo-classes and transitions in CSS. Let's start by understanding what pseudo-classes are. Pseudo-classes are keywords added to a CSS selector to target a specific state of that element. Common states include hover, active, focus, visited, first child, last child, and noth child. Let's go through each of these. First, let's understand the hover state. In simple terms, hover is a pseudo-class that activates when a user moves their mouse over an element. It lets you define what should happen and which CSS properties should apply during that interaction. For example, consider a button. Without hover, moving the mouse over it does nothing at all. But as you can see on screen, once a hover pseudo-class is applied, moving the mouse over that button creates interactive feedback that improves the user experience. For instance, the background color might change, or the button might scale up slightly. This is what hover allows us to achieve. Second, we have the active state. Active applies the moment something is clicked. At that instant, the element enters its active state. A common example is a hyperlink. Once you click a link and later revisit that page, the link's color often changes, indicating you have already visited it. Third, we have the focus pseudo-class. Focus applies when a user clicks into a specific field. For example, with the text input field, the moment a user clicks into it, we can apply a different border or other visual properties to indicate that it is now focused. Next, we have first child. First child lets us target only the very first element among a group of children inside a parent. For instance, if a div contains 5 list items and we want to target only the very first one, we write div, then first child, and only that first list item is selected. Last child works the same way but targets the final child, in this case the 5th list item inside that same div. Similarly, if we had 10 list items inside a div container and wanted to target a specific one in the middle, say the 4th or 7th, we use nth-child. Inside nth-child, we simply specify the number of the element we want to target. For example, writing 7 to target the 7th item. The second major topic here is transition. Transition controls how changes to an element happen, specifically how smoothly they happen. For example, look at this button. Without a transition applied, the color change or scale up on hover happens instantly, with no smoothness at all. But once a transition is applied, that same color change and scale up happen gradually and smoothly instead of all at once. That is exactly what the transition property achieves. The syntax for transition starts with a property name you want to animate, such as background color or color. After that comes the duration, how long the change should take to complete, with 0.5 seconds being a commonly used value. Beyond that, we also have the timing function and delay, including values like ease, ease in, and ease in out. Ease in out specifically means the transition starts fast, slows down in the middle, and then slows again toward the end. In simple terms, pseudo-classes apply styling to an element during a specific state, such as hover, focus, or active, while transitions ensure that any changes happen smoothly rather than instantly. Both of these techniques exist purely to improve user experience. Enough theory. Let's move into the code and apply this practically so it becomes easier to understand. I have VS Code open and I am currently inside style.css. Let's start with the button. We want its background color to change on hover. To achieve this, we first select the button element using a standard CSS selector. Then, after a colon, we add hover. Inside the hover rule, we write background dash color since that is the property we want to change. For the value, we will use an RGB color. Feel free to choose any color you like. At this point, you won't see any visible change yet. The change only appears when you move the mouse over the button, since that is exactly what hover is designed to detect. Now, as I move the mouse over it, you can see the color changing in real time. This effect is made possible entirely by the hover pseudo-class. If you look closely, you'll notice the color change happens instantly, which doesn't create a great user experience. We want that color change to happen a little more gradually. But before that, let's add another property so the button also scales up slightly on hover. To do this, we use the transform property. We write transform, followed by scale, and assign it a value of 1.1. With this value applied, hovering over the button now causes it to visibly scale up. However, this scaling is also happening instantly. So, to slow it down, we first add a transition property inside the base button rule. Inside transition, we write all since we want this to apply to every property that changes, followed by a duration. Let's use 0.5 seconds, slightly slower for clarity. We will also add the same transition property inside the hover rule below it. Let me explain why transition needs to be written in both the base button rule and the hover rule. Inside the hover rule as well, we set the transition to all properties over 0.5 seconds. Now, when we hover, the transition happens gradually, taking about half a second to complete. You can see that clearly now. We applied transition in both places so that the scale-up is smooth when the mouse enters, and equally smooth when the mouse leaves, and the button returns to its original size. It works smoothly in both directions. If we remove the transition from one of these rules, it would only animate smoothly in one direction. I hope this has made transition, transform, and hover, and how they work together, completely clear. There's one more thing I want to walk through. The nth child property I mentioned earlier involving first child, last child, and nth child. Let's apply nth child to our social icons. If you look at these icons right now, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Telegram all share the exact same color. But that isn't what we want. We want Facebook to appear in its brand blue, and YouTube to appear in its brand red, and so on. How do we achieve this? One option is to give each icon its own individual class, a Facebook class, a YouTube class, and so on. But that approach makes the code unnecessarily long. A smarter approach is to handle this directly through nth child. Since these icons sit inside a div, we begin by targeting that div. We write div, and since each icon is represented using an I tag, we target that I element next. Then we apply nth child, and inside it, we write 1. Since the first icon in our list is Facebook, this targets Facebook specifically. If we were targeting YouTube instead, we would use the value 2. Inside this rule, we then write color and set it to blue. As soon as we apply blue, you can see Facebook's icon color update immediately. Next, for our second icon, we again write div, then I, then nth child. This time with the value 2, since YouTube is the second icon. Inside this rule, we write the color property and set its value to red. You can see YouTube's icon color has also changed to red. Following the same pattern, we target the third icon by writing div, then I, then nth child, with the value 3. For this one, we set the color property using the exact RGB value that matches LinkedIn's official brand color. We follow the same approach for Telegram as well, using its own RGB value. We write div, then I, then nth child, and inside it, we use the value 4 since Telegram is the fourth icon in our list. Inside this rule, we apply that same RGB value to the color property. And there you have it. Using pseudo-classes, we were able to target each individual element inside a shared container with precision. I hope this leaves you with no further confusion on this topic. Looking at the card, if we consider its width at the moment and expand it, you will see it stops behaving like a card entirely. It stretches across the full page. Since we want this to remain a contained card, we need to define its width explicitly. This is done using the width property. Inside the card class, we set the width to 450 pixels. You can see the card has now snapped to that fixed width. Previously it filled the full page, now it is properly contained. We will set the height to auto. Auto means the height will adjust dynamically based on the content inside. If the content is minimal, the height will be minimal as well. The next property we will add is box shadow. I will write it first and then walk through how each value works. We set box shadow with 4 values: 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 13 pixels, 5 pixels, followed by a color. I will use the hex value 929292. After applying this, you can see a subtle shadow now surrounds the card. It is not a harsh black shadow. It is a soft, gray-tinted shadow that creates a clear visual separation between the card and the background behind it. Let me now demonstrate what each value controls. If we change the first 0 to 10, you will see the shadow shift toward the right. This first value controls the horizontal offset. We will set it back to 0. If we change the second 0 to 20, you will see the shadow shift downward. This second value controls the vertical offset. The third value, currently 13 pixels, controls the blur radius. Increasing it spreads and softens the shadow. The fourth value, 5 pixels, controls the spread, how far the shadow expands outward. That is how all 4 values work together. The next property we will apply is border radius, set to 5 pixels. Border radius rounds the corners of the card. Previously, the corners were sharp and angular. Now they are gently curved. Sharp corners tend to look harsh, so this small change noticeably improves the card's appearance. If you look at the paragraph text, the letters are sitting very close together, and the line spacing between rows is also quite tight. To improve readability and create a better user experience, we will target the paragraph tag and add the letter spacing property set to 0.6 pixels. As you can see, letter spacing increases the horizontal space between individual characters. The second property we add to the paragraph is line height is set to 24 pixels. This creates comfortable vertical spacing between the lines of text. Next, we will target the article element. The skills list inside the article, items like HTML and CSS, also lacks line spacing. We set line height to 1.7 on the article. You can see in the browser that the list items now breathe more freely. The spacing makes the whole section more readable. Similarly, we apply letter spacing to the list item tag, setting it to 0.7 pixels. Now let's improve the button since it currently does not look polished. Its width, height, and color all need attention. First, we set the button's width to 100%. You can see it now stretches the full width of the card. Next, we set the background color using an RGB value, approximately 175, 93, 5, which produces a dark mustard tone. We set the text color to white, which reads cleanly against that background. We set the border to none, removing the default browser outline. We also add the cursor property and set it to pointer. Now, when you hover over the button, the cursor changes to the familiar hand icon, a small but important usability signal. We add border radius of 5 pixels to the button as well, giving its corners the same gentle curve as the card. The button is already looking much more refined. Finally, we add letter spacing to the button text, set to 1.8 pixels. The button now looks like something you would find on a real production website. One more thing. The social icons currently appear quite small. To increase their size, we go to the div rule and target the I tag inside it. We set font size to 25 pixels. You can now see the Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn icons have all increased noticeably in size. Our default card styling is now complete. Next, we will add dark and light mode theme switching using only HTML and CSS. The card is ready. Now we will add dark and light theme functionality, and we will achieve this using only HTML and CSS. To get started, we go into the HTML file, and below the body opening tag, we add an input element. Its type is checkbox, and we assign it the ID theme-toggle. I have already covered IDs, so there is no need to revisit that. In the browser, you can see a small checkbox has appeared on the page. We will now hide it. We add the hidden attribute to the input element, and as you can see in the browser, the checkbox is no longer visible. It still exists in the HTML. It is just invisible. After this, we add a label element. Inside the label, we use the for attribute and set it to the same value as our ID, theme-toggle. We also give this label a class name of theme-btn. Inside the label, we add an icon using the Font Awesome Solid Moon class. You can now see a moon icon has appeared in the browser. The purpose of this label is important. When the user clicks the moon icon, it acts as though they have clicked the hidden checkbox. Clicking it once checks the checkbox. Clicking it again unchecks it. Since the actual checkbox is hidden, we are using the moon icon as a visible, stylable stand-in. Next, we wrap all of our existing section code inside a div and give that div the class name page. After this, we open style.css. Inside the root selector, we will update the text color variable, the BG color variable, and add a new variable called card color. The card color value will be a clean white. Next, we write a CSS rule targeting the theme toggle ID. After the ID, we chain the checked pseudo-class. Following that, we use the tilde character, which is the subsequent sibling combinator. What this combinator does is target a sibling element that follows the specified element in the HTML structure. After the tilde, we target .page, the class we assigned to the wrapper div. Inside this rule, we override the text color, BG color, and card color variables with dark mode values, white text, and dark background colors. We also remove the background color from the body rule and add a transition of 0.3 seconds so the theme switch animates smoothly. The moon icon and theme button need styling. Right now, it is sitting awkwardly in the corner. We target the theme -btn class. We set position to fixed. I have not covered the position property in detail, but position fixed keeps an element locked in place on the screen. It will not move regardless of scrolling. We position it 130 pixels from the top and 55 pixels from the right. We set its width and height each to 50 pixels. We set the background color using an RGB value for white. We set border radius to 50%, which makes it a perfect circle. We set display to flex, align items to center, and justify content to center. So the icon sits exactly in the middle of the circle. We set cursor to pointer and font size to 20 pixels. The theme button styling is now complete. It looks clean and properly positioned. Next, we target the page class. We set the background color using the BG color variable so it is dynamic. We set margin top to 0 rem. We set mine height to 100 viewport height units. Let me briefly explain 2 units you may not have encountered yet. 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels. This is useful when working with large values, since writing rem keeps the numbers more manageable. Viewport height, or VH, represents a percentage of the visible screen height. So 100 viewport height means the element takes up the full screen height. Setting it to 90 would make it 90% of the screen height. Below this, we write another rule, the theme toggle ID with the checked pseudo class, followed by a plus sign and the theme-btn class. This targets the theme button specifically when the checkbox is in its checked state. You can see it is now working. Clicking the moon icon toggles the dark mode. However, there are a few things still to fix. The card background has not yet been connected to the card color variable. We update the card's background color to use the card color variable so it responds dynamically to the theme toggle. The card background is now switching correctly. The text color on the card is also not updating correctly. We update the color property to use the text color variable. The text is now switching correctly as well. Finally, in dark mode, the box shadow is too intense. It looks overpowering against the dark background. We go to the box shadow property and reduce the shadow color to a more subtle value. Dark mode is now working correctly across all elements. I hope the implementation of dark mode theming is now clear. Our final topic is DevTools, an essential tool every developer needs to understand. First, let's expand the browser to full width. You will notice the theme toggle icon has shifted position. Since it is fixed, it stays attached to the viewport rather than the card. Now let's click Inspect to open DevTools. Once DevTools is open, you can see the full HTML structure of the page on the left panel. If you have already studied HTML, this markup will look very familiar. On the right panel, you can see all of the CSS rules currently applied. Properties like background-color, margin, and height are all displayed there. If I click on the section element in the HTML panel, specifically the card section, All of its associated CSS rules appear on the right. Everything written in style.css is reflected here in real time. The powerful thing about DevTools is that you can make live changes directly inside it. For example, if you want to test a color before committing it to your code, you can change it here temporarily. These changes are only temporary. The moment you refresh the browser, everything reverts to the values in your CSS file. For example, I can change the background color to red right now. You can see it has changed to red instantly. When I refresh, it returns to white. This is an invaluable workflow for comparing colors, testing shadows, adjusting margins, and fine-tuning any visual property before writing it permanently. Every developer should be comfortable using DevTools. Knowing how to use it is just as important as knowing how to write the CSS itself. To summarize, if you want to learn CSS with a proper, step-by-step structure following industry standard practices, everything covered in this course is more than enough to get you started. But if you want to go beyond this and master CSS completely, which is not strictly necessary but certainly valuable, W3 Schools offers comprehensive documentation on CSS. It covers not just CSS but also HTML, JavaScript, and almost every major web technology. Every single property is documented clearly, with examples and exercises for each one. I would genuinely recommend using W3 Schools as a reference alongside this course. The second piece of advice: now that you have completed HTML and CSS, you must build 2 to 3 landing pages on your own. If you skip this step, the knowledge will not stick. When the moment comes to build something from scratch, you will find yourself unable to start. To get inspiration, search for landing pages on Dribble, or look up any website or dashboard you admire, and try to recreate it visually. Right now, what you build may feel impressive to you, but 2 or 3 months from now, looking back at your early work may feel humbling, and that is completely normal and healthy. What matters is that you are building real things at a professional quality level to practice against. The goal is not to replicate the design perfectly. Do not aim for 100% accuracy, as that is genuinely not worth the time. However, do not use AI to build these practice projects. Yes, AI could complete a landing page in a single day, while you might take 20. But those 20 days of manual building develop the muscle memory that no shortcut can replace. Once you have built that foundation, once you know you can build any layout independently, then absolutely use AI to accelerate your workflow. At that stage, reaching for AI is a productivity tool, not a crutch. Something you could build manually in 28 days, AI can complete in 2 or 3. As for which AI tools are worth using, Cursor, Codex, Claude, and Google Gemini are all strong options that are widely used right now. I hope you have enjoyed this 1-hour course. Covering all of CSS completely in 1 hour is genuinely not possible. A thorough course would take 5 to 6 hours at minimum. But what I have focused on are the properties that account for 90% of real-world CSS usage. I have deliberately excluded properties that are rarely needed in modern development, things like legacy positioning, float-based layouts, and table structures. There were many properties I did not cover, and that was an intentional choice. I hope this video has been valuable to you. If you would like to see a follow-up course, whether on HTML or JavaScript, drop a comment below and let me know. Subscribe so you are notified when the next course goes live, and share your thoughts on this course. I would genuinely love to hear how it went for you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.